Hello, this is the Dreadweaver. Prepare yourself for a night of true horror stories that will weave webs of terror in the darkest corners of your mind. If you're a fan of stories of mystery, true crime, paranormal, or anything that crawls in the shadows just beyond our sight, you've found the right place. Happy Halloween, everyone! Tonight is the last installment of our Spooktober series, and we are featuring 10 allegedly true paranormal stories that will turn your blood to ice. If you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications. All of these actions tell YouTube that you want to hear more from us. And with that, let us delve into the darkness. Story 1. I found my old diary and something is wrong with it. So I don't usually discuss these things, but I need to tell someone because I feel like I'm losing my mind. This started a week ago when I found my old diary from when I was 10. I hadn't thought about it in years, but I came across it in a dusty box in my attic while I was cleaning out some stuff for a garage sale. I was excited at first, like a piece of my childhood. I started flipping through the pages, reading about my 5th grade drama, crushes, and random little notes about my day. But then I found something weird. There's an entry in the diary that I don't remember writing at all. It's dated March 16th, 2011, which would have been the day after my 11th birthday. It starts off normal, talking about the party and the gifts I got. Then, it takes a turn. There's a section where I wrote, "Mom says I shouldn't go in the attic anymore. She says it's not safe, but I keep hearing the whispers up there. Last night, they called my name." I froze when I read that. I didn't remember anything like that happening, but the writing was mine, or at least it looked like it. After that entry, the diary goes back to being normal, talking about school and friends. I tried to brush it off as a weird childhood memory or maybe my imagination running wild. But then things started happening around the house. Little things at first. I'd hear creaks in the attic above my room at night. I figured it was just the house settling, but then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. 2 nights ago, it got worse. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something moving upstairs. Not just footsteps, but dragging. Like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to go up there and check. When I opened the attic door, the dragging stopped, but the air felt thick, like someone was watching me. Yesterday, I decided to read more of the diary, and I found another entry that I definitely don't remember writing. It said, "He's in the attic again. He wants me to come back. He says he's lonely, but I don't want to go up there anymore. Mom says it's dangerous, but he keeps calling my name. He knows I'm scared." Here's the thing. My mom never said anything about the attic being dangerous. In fact, we rarely used it when I was a kid. So where did this come from? And who the hell is he? Last night, I woke up to whispers. Not creaks or footsteps this time. Actual whispers. I swear to God I heard my name, just like in the diary. But when I went to check, the attic was empty. I don't know what to do. I'm starting to feel like I'm losing it. I thought about burning the diary, but something is stopping me. I keep thinking maybe I'll find answers if I keep reading, but I'm also terrified of what I might find. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Could this be some sort of childhood trauma resurfacing? Or is it possible for an old diary to somehow change? I need advice. Story 2. I saw her doppelganger clinging on her back. When I was a kid, my parents told me that I have a third eye. Here in the Philippines, if you can see ghosts and apparitions, it means you have awakened your third eye, an eye which you use to see spirits. The reason they told me this is because I kept seeing things when I was little. My mom's grandmother, a child that was in our house, and scariest of all, my cousin's doppelganger. It was around dinner time when my cousin Sherika and I were running around the house playing. I would chase her around the house playing tag and giggling. My mom called for us to eat dinner. I remember it was fried chicken because when I had almost finished my food, my cousin asked me if I wanted to play hide and seek. As a kid, that was my favorite game, and I agreed. I started counting while I was munching on that good-ass fried chicken, and my cousin started hiding. After counting to 10, I started my search while still holding the fried chicken in my right hand. The first room I searched was my uncle's bedroom. I looked behind the door, and luckily enough, I found her immediately. My mom and my aunt were in the kitchen conversing when I suddenly started crying and running toward them. My mom asked me what happened, and I told them that I saw a second Sherika, clinging behind my real cousin Sherika. Now, to this day, I still remember what I saw. There were 2 of my cousin Sherika behind the door. The second one was clinging on her back, peeking behind her shoulder, smiling at me. The reason I still remember this is because it was my one and only encounter with a doppelganger. And also, my mom took a photo of me holding a fried chicken while crying because she found it funny. Now, I'm not quite sure if it was really a doppelganger or a ghost disguised as my cousin, but it was still a scary encounter nonetheless since I was only 7 years old. I wish I could find that photo of me, though. Story 3. The Phantom Hand. My grandfather was a wonderful, kind, and hard-working man. His parents were first-generation Italian immigrants who worked hard to provide a better life for their children. My grandfather grew up on a farm, one his parents originally worked at and later purchased after the original owners passed on. As his parents aged, he took over more and more responsibilities on the farm until they eventually retired and passed the farm on to him. He loved his farm, and we loved visiting him and playing in the very same places he had played as a child. Grandpa was very guarded about one spot on the farm, though. A small barn on the edge of the property by the tree line, now vacant and decaying after years of abandonment. We assumed that was why we were strictly forbidden from going anywhere near this barn, as it was a potential hazard. It wasn't until we grew older that Grandpa told us the real story. The whole family gathered at Grandma and Grandpa's farm for Thanksgiving that year. All of us cousins, ranging in age from toddlers to late teens, were running around the farm as the last remaining Thanksgiving dishes were finishing up in the oven. My cousin, Bea, and I, now 16 and 17, found ourselves near the tree line at the back of the property, close to the old barn. It had been a source of intrigue and mystery our entire lives, and now that we were older, we decided we were responsible enough to stay out of harm's way, so a quick peek inside the forbidden barn would do no harm. We started making our way toward it, excited to finally see what the big deal was all about. As I reached to unlatch the barn door, I heard a commotion coming from the back porch of the farmhouse. There was Grandpa, sprinting off the back porch, yelling his head off and making his way across the property, faster than I'd ever seen him move. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he asked us when he finally reached us. We explained our reasoning, and he explained that the condition of the barn was not what made it a danger. He walked us back up to the farmhouse, took us into a quiet guest room away from the younger children, and finally explained why that particular barn should be avoided at all costs. Back when Grandpa's parents were just working on the farm, a young farmhand had worked later than usual one fall evening to finish a carpentry project that needed to be completed by the following morning. At the time, the barn at the back of the property housed a lot of tools and farm equipment and had a room that served as a workshop. The next morning, the farmer noticed the barn doors had never been closed the previous evening and went to investigate. He found the young man dead just outside the doors to the workshop. He was only 21 years old. No one knows for sure what happened, but it appeared that the young man had suffered an accident in which he lost his hand, and in his panic and haste to leave the barn and find help, he had tripped and impaled himself on a tool just outside the workshop door. The young man was laid to rest in the coming days, but strangely, they were never able to find the hand that he had lost. The farmer chalked this up to wildlife, as the barn doors had been open all night, and anything could have come and gone during the hours the body laid there. Grandpa was a young child when this incident occurred. As years went on, more young farmhands came and went, none ever staying for long. Young men that went into the barn would come running out terrified and refuse to go back. There were several minor accidents in which farmhands were injured, but thankfully none as seriously as the first. They all swore up and down that something had caused them to trip, resulting in their accidents. This scared Grandpa a lot as a boy, but as he grew older and began helping with small tasks on the farm, he reasoned that the men were just spooked by the stories that had surrounded the farm since the initial accident. By his late teens, he was visiting that barn daily to retrieve farm equipment and had never experienced anything out of the ordinary. He continued this routine for years, taking over the role that the hired farmhands continually ran from. Grandpa was a good worker, and the farmer appreciated him and his ability to reason through the things that had spooked others in the past. Grandpa had no idea what could possibly have spooked the others, and was certain that they had simply let their imaginations run away with them. Fast forward to the fall of the year Grandpa turned 21. Everyone on the farm was working around the clock to prepare for the harvest season. The sun was starting to set, and Grandpa still had to finish mucking the stalls in the calf barn. He headed to the barn on the back of the property to gather the right equipment and load a wagon with some fresh straw. As he moved about the barn, he stopped several times, thinking he heard movement from somewhere inside. Seeing nothing, he assumed it must be a critter that had found its way inside to escape the weather that was beginning to grow colder. He made his way over to the wall outside the workshop, where farm tools were stored. As he approached the tool rack, he felt his foot catch on something, causing him to trip and fall directly into the rack of sharp metal instruments. Luckily, he managed to avoid any injury and pulled himself to a sitting position to gather himself. As he turned around to see what his foot had gotten stuck on, he saw a severed hand lying on the floor right where he had tripped. The hand looked gray in color, as if it had been there for some time. Grandpa was stunned, but still figured there must be some logical explanation for what had happened. He got to his feet, intending to get a closer look and get to the bottom of the situation. That's when the hand moved and started inching its way toward him at an alarmingly fast pace. Grandpa turned and grabbed a pitchfork from the wall behind him, jabbed it into the hand, and ran from the barn in a hurry. His dad was nearby and saw him running from the barn. He hurried over to see what was wrong. My grandpa explained what had happened, and he and his father ventured back into the barn together. The hand was gone, but the pitchfork remained in the middle of the floor, a small trail of blood leading to a nearby pile of straw. My grandpa, his father, and the farmer searched the whole barn, but found nothing, not even a rodent that Grandpa could have mistaken in his panic. The three men became convinced that the spirit of the young farmhand who died there was not at rest, and was targeting other young farmhands out of anger stemming from his tragic death. The farmer had a new barn built to take the old one's place, and from that day forward, no one set foot in the old barn again. My cousin and I laughed at first, thinking Grandpa was pulling our leg like he had always done when we were children. After all, what sane person would believe a story like that? Grandpa insisted he was serious, however, and told us the barn was entirely unsafe, especially at our age. He made us promise we wouldn't try to enter the barn ever again. We promised, and the three of us joined the rest of the family for Thanksgiving dinner. That was a few years ago. I'm 21 now, and still not sure what to make of Grandpa's story. Grandpa's been slowing down a bit, and I've been visiting more often to help around the farm. The old barn still lurks at the back of the property, unused and untouched for decades. I often ride by as I complete chores, and I'm tempted to take a peek inside and find out what Grandpa's really worried about. Couldn't hurt, right? Just one peek. Story 4. Something Called My Son, by That Response 1509. I haven't had any remarkable paranormal experiences of my own, but I'm not a disbeliever. I have a 5-year-old son. His dad, myself, and my son will often stay over at my father-in-law's house, as my own father lives across the street, and my brother-in-law lives in the house behind the yard. My brother-in-law has a 2-year-old boy who my son plays with every time we're there. They are very close. For this story, we'll call the 2-year-old D. D goes home around 8 to get ready for bed, and he's never out at dark or by himself. For backstory, this house has a vibe to it. I won't say it's bad, but it seems to bring out bad emotions for people who are frequently there. So much so that my father-in-law's late fiancée succumbed to her poor mental health in a fiery way in the home, and my boyfriend and I will find ourselves angry and fighting at night there. This is not typical of our relationship, and we're not fighting over any real things either. This is common for everyone who visits or has stayed. It's not bad enough that we don't want to come around. However, what my son heard may change that, at least at night. A couple nights ago, while staying the night, about an hour or two after Dee had already gone home, my son stopped playing and started running to the door saying, "Dee is here! I just heard him say my name!" When we told him Dee was at home in bed, my son said, "No, I just heard him yell my name. He wants me to go play with him." There was absolutely nobody else but my son and boyfriend in the house, and we didn't hear anything at all. He heard the call from close by, close enough that we should have heard it too. Dee is very excited over my son and is quite loud when hollering for him. My son was quite confused when we verified that Dee was home asleep. Could this have been something trying to mimic Dee to lure my son? Or just a 5-year-old boy's imagination? It definitely sent a chill down our spines. Story 5. Something Was Under My Bed, by Queen Jen. As far as paranormal experiences go, this is probably one of the scariest ones I've had, even though it wasn't really that extreme compared to a lot of stories I've heard and read. Either way, it happened sometime in 2013 when I was 19. I had my room in the basement in my dad's house. It was late at night, and I lay there on my bed in complete darkness. I needed to sleep because I had school the next day, but I suffered from insomnia back then and felt too energetic to go to sleep. I lay there for a good while, with thoughts swirling around in my mind, when I suddenly heard a noise. I opened my eyes, but it was completely dark. I started to think I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, scratching. From there, it went on, getting more and more intense, and I quickly realized the noise was coming from underneath my bed. My eyes widened, and panic spread throughout my body. It sounded as if someone was frantically clawing on the floor. Did I leave one of the cats in here before I went to bed? I thought, trying everything to rationalize the situation. But I already knew, not even a cat could make that kind of noise. Then I felt something, like a scratching and punching against my back from underneath my mattress. The best way I can describe the whole thing is to imagine some poor soul being trapped inside a coffin, desperately trying to break out, and I was on top of that coffin. I was paralyzed by the shock of it all, not knowing what to do. After I had been laying there for a good while, with the scratching and punching still going on, my fear eventually turned into some kind of rage. I jumped out of bed, ran across the room, and turned on the lights. Then I threw myself on the floor, looked under the bed, and yelled, "What do you want from me?" Nothing was there. The scratching had stopped, and there was no one in the room except me. I somehow managed to fall asleep after that experience. A couple of months later, a friend of mine from school moved into our house. She rented a room from my dad on the top floor. After she had been there for 3 nights, she came to me in the morning and said she'd had the craziest thing happen to her during the night. I could almost feel my skin turn pale as she told me the story of the exact same thing that had happened to me. The scratching, the punching against the mattress. I knew for certain that I had never told her about my experience. We were both really freaked out when I told her the exact same thing had happened to me 2 floors down, just months earlier. Story 6. The Stuffed Animal of Nightmares by Kai5267. I have a stuffed dog named Doggy that I got when I was 4 years old. For context, I am 24 now. Doggy went with me everywhere, and I would always hold him when I fell asleep. He was my best friend. However, I think when I was 6, I had a horrible dream that I still remember to this day. I was in a black room with a red halo glow on the horizon. All of a sudden, a very loud, dark male's voice booms out, "You are going to hell!" It was my first dream that scared me so bad I couldn't sleep by myself for a long time. I want to say that this is when the nightmare started, but I really have no idea. I just know that from then on, every time I slept with Doggy, I would get some of the worst nightmares I've ever had in my life. I stopped sleeping with him because even my tiny child brain could tell that something wasn't right, and I would start sleeping with my Tiger instead. Tiger never gave me nightmares, but of course I wanted to sleep with Doggy because he was my best friend. However, every time I tried, I would have a really bad nightmare again and be too scared to sleep with him. I have tried at different points over the years to see if it would happen again, because I can't accept that my favorite little buddy is capable of causing me such mental pain, but it happens every time. Even the fur over his eyes has shifted, making him look angry, and I can't push his fur into place. It's stuck like that. I can't find any info online of someone else having a similar experience, so I wanted to see if anyone else has a similar experience because I literally feel crazy. I don't know if it's just me or something paranormal. Story 7. Ghosts of My Childhood. My mom and Nana told me that when I was 3 to 4 years old, I used to hide behind the sofa to talk to my friend. They assumed I had an imaginary friend, until one day my Nana asked who my friend was. I told her that my friend was called Wee Stevie. He had blonde hair like me, and he wanted his lemon bonbons. My mom had a younger sibling who died when he was 8 as he was run over by a drunk driver. My mom was 16 at the time, and 4 years later at 20, she had me. Her brother was called Stephen. My Nana was Scottish, and we lived not far from the English-Scottish border on the English side. So apart from my Nana speaking Scottish and having an accent, my accent was very much English, so it was odd for me to use a Scottish term such as we, and I couldn't have known about Stephen. Apparently, one day before my 5th birthday, I told my Nana and Mum that wee Stevie couldn't visit anymore, and that was that. He'd gone, and I never spoke to him again. I do have a vague memory of sitting behind the sofa talking, but I don't remember seeing him. When I got into my teens, odd things would happen in the house. They were never directed at me, though. Pictures would fall from walls, and over the space of 6 weeks, the living room door shook very gently, until the day my Nana was hoovering in there, and the door shut on her and wouldn't open. I was there at the time. I was upstairs with my mum when we heard Nana shout. We all lived together in the same house Stephen also lived in. I ran downstairs with my mum, and we both witnessed the door shake, with my Nana shouting from the other side to stop it and let her out. She thought it was my mom, but it wasn't. There was nobody around. During this time, while I never had anything happen directly to me, I started to feel like there was something bad in the house. I started having recurring nightmares about being in the house alone and trying to get out, but an invisible force would chase me, grab me by the feet, and drag me back into the living room. I'm 43 now, and occasionally I still have this nightmare. I always felt like there was something negative attached to me while living there. As an adult, I've also experienced some strange occurrences over the years. Once, when my son was a newborn, I had put him in his cot to sleep at around 8 p.m., so it was dark. I crept out of the room and pulled the door to, leaving only the landing light on. His baby monitor was on. I left the house to go to the car and get my bag, and when I looked up at the house, his bedroom light was on. As I got closer to the house, I could hear him crying through the monitor. As I went into the room, he'd gotten tangled in the blanket, and it covered his face, and he was struggling to breathe. Fast forward another few years, and we'd moved house. Odd things used to happen. Nothing really weird, just shadows which could be explained, or our dog staring at walls. It always got more frequent if there had been an argument in the house. One morning, my husband and I were having a disagreement about our business. We were sitting at the kitchen table facing the living room with the door open. Our little dog was fast asleep on the sofa. Out of nowhere, a giant Yankee candle flew off the table and hit my husband's Xbox box so hard that the box ended up in the kitchen doorway. Our poor dog was terrified and ran into the kitchen to be with us. We then left this house and moved, and things seemed to escalate in our new home. We found about 50 small bunches of herbs wrapped in twine, and they were all hanging from the ceiling of one of our barns. The house was a converted barn that was once a farm. We thought it was weird and wondered if it was some kind of protection thing. Our dog wouldn't let you leave him alone, which was very unlike him. As soon as you walked out the door, he would howl, and he was really distressed. By this point, my son was 18, and we all felt a negative presence. You felt like you were being watched. Even with the heat on and being really warm, the room would suddenly have freezing spots that you could feel with your hands. The Alexa would start playing music by itself, although this probably happens to other people's Alexas, so it might not be paranormal. One morning, my son asked me to stop coming into his room at night. I asked what he meant, and he said that he'd often wake up to his door opening, and he assumed I was standing there watching him. He'd ask what I was doing, and the door would just close slowly. It is true that a couple of times I did go into my son's room to see if he was home after he started driving, but this was only a couple of times, and my son never woke up or spoke to me. Then on to my husband. Ever since we've been together, he has suffered from extreme parasomnia. In his dreams, he constantly sees a 7-foot-tall dark figure in the corner of the room, and this has been in every house we've lived in. It taunts him, touches him, and watches him. He then acts out his dreams and will pull me out of the bed. He's picked up our dog and tried to escape the room. He stood above me on the bed screaming, hit me, dragged me, and it's usually always because he's either trying to fight this thing or get me away from it. He's had parasomnia since he was 13, but only started seeing this dark figure since he's been with me. One night, I fell out with my husband, and I slept in the spare room. Our dog was in our main bedroom with my husband with the door shut. Our dog was a small poodle cross, so he couldn't jump on the spare bed because it was quite high. So I deliberately shut him in with my husband, otherwise he would have kept whining to get on and off the bed. Anyway, I was asleep and awoke to what felt like something jumping on the bed by my feet. Slowly, I felt something crawling up my legs, almost like a dog, but it wasn't. By this point, I was wide awake, absolutely frozen with fear. When it got to my thighs, I jumped up and there was nothing there. Like, I thought the door was shut. I couldn't get out of that room quick enough. I got back in my own bed and told my husband what had happened. We never let anyone sleep in the spare room after that. I have no idea if we are both just sensitive to this stuff. Our current house feels nice with a good energy. We often feel something, but it's nice and warm. My husband still dreams about this thing, but not as often. Story 8. House Ghosts by Fatboifatse. This story is a bit of a long one, but this is our experience. I'm open to any suggestions to help deal with it all. To begin, my fiancé and I have both had some form of experience with the paranormal, some of which could be very easily disputed, but others not so much. For instance, as a kid, my siblings and I came home from being out and found the back door wide open. We all swear it was closed, but it could have been left open or unlocked and someone came in. Once my dog was barking at my bookshelf, and then the books that were sitting there about an inch or two away from the edge fell off and ended up all over the floor. My fiancé has had experiences in one of her old houses where her ex was pinned down to their bed, and one of her kids was dragged down their hallway by a spirit, among other moments where her kids would see spirits in their old houses. Now that some of our history has been told, let's fast forward to our more recent experiences. A couple of years ago, I was at home watching TV when our spice rack that was very much secured to the kitchen wall had fallen down, knocking over our knife block, and all the spices fell onto the floor, with one knife laying in the center of the hallway facing down to the room I was in. After that, my fiancé kept seeing shadows outside of our bedroom door, so we set up a camera in our hallway that looked down toward our room. One night, we were laying in bed and heard the camera switch between night vision and daytime. I opened the camera and was watching it while my fiancé watched out into the hallway. The whole time that my fiancé was watching the hallway, she didn't see anything. However, the camera picked up a light flash near the ceiling with no actual source visible to the naked eye. The shadows continued on until one night our daughter, 8 years old at the time, came into our room crying and petrified. She claimed to have heard a knock on the window from outside. We went outside to see if there was anything in the backyard and couldn't see anything apart from our dog laying by the door, confused as to why we were coming out. We went into our older daughter's room to ask if she and her friend heard knocking on the windows. They stated they did, but thought it was us. We then proceeded to get our younger daughter settled in our room. About 30 minutes later, our eldest daughter and her friend came running into our room petrified because they heard something say our daughter's name as clear as daylight. After this, my fiancé began to see a face at the top of our door in the bedroom. She described it as a pale face with long black hair and eyes that would change from black to red to spiraling in an angry form. However, she couldn't see a body. With this, I began playing worship music and attempted to pray over us all and rebuke whatever was there. Once I had started this, my fiancé began to see bars going across our door frames that were a bright, pure white color. That night, we weren't able to get much sleep and both had to cancel our shifts at work. Throughout the period after that, my fiancé continuously saw the face as if it was tormenting us. We purchased an EMF reader from eBay, which would continuously spike in different places, but mostly in our youngest son's room, our room, and the kids' lounge room. Then one day, our youngest boy, 3 years old, came home from his dad's house and began breaking down, full-on crying, attempting to take his clothes off as if they were irritating him. He began saying to get out and leave, and that he doesn't want them there, and kept looking up to the corner of the lounge room and screaming to get out. We didn't know what to do or how to help him, and had managed to eventually calm him down. He had no real recollection of what happened. After that, it was just the usual shadow figures and the face for a while, until one night when my brother visited our house. We were playing Murder in the Dark, and he hid in our youngest child's closet. He came out midway through the game, stating he didn't want to play anymore. He looked physically shaken and said something grabbed him on his back. We had a look at his back, and there were scratch marks going down his shoulder blade area. Safe to say, we no longer played that game. Again, it was back to shadows and faces until one of the final straws for us at our old house. My fiancé and I were laying in bed, and our youngest boy, 4 at the time, youngest girl, 9, and oldest boy, 13, were out in the main lounge room playing Roblox. Our youngest daughter and oldest son came running into our room, saying there was something wrong with our youngest. My fiancé and I ran out to the lounge room and found him lying on the couch, bawling his eyes out and speaking incoherently. We picked him up, and my fiancé took him to our room. I asked the older two what had happened, to which they said he just got really angry and was going to throw the Xbox controller at something in the dining room. My fiancé asked our youngest what was going on, and he stated, "It was coming at us and I didn't want it to." We managed to get him settled, and he soon fell asleep, after which we began to try and find out what it was and what it wanted, using things like GhostTube and the EMF reader. The responses we got indicated that it was allegedly evil and wanted our youngest and I. After this, we again rebuked it and only saw the shadows. We have since moved into our new house and finally started to get back to normal after it all. However, our youngest boy, who's now 5, doesn't want to sleep in his room, and we've begun hearing footsteps and seeing the shadow again, as well as hearing things bang throughout different periods of the day, with no one near where it came from. A couple of times at night, when trying to fall asleep, I heard something yell in my ear, but it hasn't happened since. My fiancé and I are both really itchy on our arms and legs, and have random bruises coming up, but that could be low iron and something in the water. We had gotten crystals to help cleanse the house, and they're supposed to ward off any spirits, but I don't think they work. I have a crystal that I wear, which is black tourmaline, I think, and has helped a little bit for now, though. Story 9. He Yelled for Help by Mushroomsnmoths. For some background information, my mom told me this story. We are in Oregon, and where we live specifically is surrounded by trees and wildlife. We have a decent-sized yard, 2.5 acres or so, I think. This is not the first time strange sounds and things have happened in this area, but I have never heard a real voice and words before. We have been living here for around 11 years, and this has never happened. This was around 2 weeks ago. It was dark outside, and my mom was taking the dogs out for the last time before bed. A little bit further down our driveway, like 10 to 15 steps, there is a shed, and a few feet beyond that is a fence that leads into our neighbor's property. It just looks like a forest. She said at this time she had one earbud in and she was listening to an audiobook. She thought she heard a man's voice, but her brain hadn't registered it, and the dogs didn't react. She heard it a second time a few seconds later, and she said she thought she heard it say, "Help me." She took her earbud out and focused, and she heard it clear as day. "Help me." The worst thing about this is she described the voice as perfectly calm and level, not raising its voice, no urgency in its tone. When she repeated what she heard, her voice was flat. She called out to it, "Hello? Are you okay?" flashing her light back in the trees, yet she saw nothing. After a few seconds, she heard something big crashing through the woods. This is when the dogs finally reacted and began barking. She said it didn't sound bipedal, and it sounded too big to be a human. This is when she went back inside. I remember she immediately came into my room, where I was watching a video on the TV, and asked, "Did the video you're watching say help me at any point?" I remember being confused and kind of annoyed, so I was like, "No." She then went and got my dad, and they both went out again to look closer. Thankfully, my mom didn't walk closer when she was alone, but I know she did call out, which isn't good. Apparently, it looked like the neighbor's house that was beyond the fence was without power, if that's relevant. Last year, my boyfriend and I heard a sound in the same area, beyond that fence, further from the shed, when it was getting dark outside. It sounded kind of like a gasp, like when you breathe in when you're choking on something. It didn't sound human, though. It repeated multiple times and began to get closer as branches snapped toward us. We booked it out of there. Again, like my mom, I didn't see anything. We both spent a while after looking up all the animal sounds and calls it could have been, and nothing came even close to matching. I have no idea what my mom heard. A fair distance away, we have some odd neighbors that are known for stealing people's stuff, screaming loudly at each other at night, being in and out of prison, etc. That's my mom's most rational explanation. However, that may be worse than something paranormal or inhuman. However, these people have never been up our driveway or to see our house specifically, and my mom didn't see anything. Our property is no stranger to these things, although stuff has calmed down a fair amount compared to years ago. I had completely forgotten about it all, and I pretty much no longer believed in the paranormal at all anymore. Me, my mom, and my dad still don't know what to think. When she told me the story, I remember my heart sinking, my stomach twisting. I was immediately filled with dread. My mom got goosebumps retelling it. She had spent a good few days deciding if she should even tell me. Thankfully, my mom doesn't go outside alone anymore after dark, and pays full attention. Story 10. The Naughty Little Ghost Girl. A few years ago, my husband and I started looking for our first home. We looked at a number of houses in different cities, hoping to find one that would be a good fit for our family. We had seen quite a few cute homes in our price range, but none had been quite the right fit for our family so far. One day, we decided to bring our daughter along to a series of home tours in a small town that sounded promising. She had just turned 3 and was very excited to help us pick out a new house. She wandered through each house on the tour with glee, telling us which rooms and features she liked, and imagining what life would be like in the houses. It was a very exciting day for her. We reached one of the last homes on the tour, a beautiful Victorian-style home with a lot of history, but without the restrictions of living in the historic district. It was a great price, lots of space, and modernized without destroying the home's character. We were very excited about this home, until we went upstairs. It was a typical layout for an older home. At the top of the stairs was a landing, and there was a bedroom on either side. The bedroom to the left was the smaller of the two, the perfect size for our 3-year-old's bedroom. She was busy spinning circles and telling me where she was going to put her toys. My husband had walked across to the larger bedroom while I tried to convince our daughter to come check it out with us. She finally reluctantly agreed, turning around to take one last glimpse of the room as I started making my way to the next. I heard a screech, followed by the sound of little feet moving quickly as she ran into the other bedroom. I asked what her scream was all about, but she was too interested in what my husband was doing to respond. She was notorious for her loud and random noises at that age, so I didn't think much of it and just followed her into the next room. There was a door to the attic in the far corner of the room, and my husband had just opened it up to check it out. My daughter followed, intrigued by the mysterious door in the bedroom. I was admiring the built-in bookshelf when I heard a thud from inside the attic. At this, my husband abruptly spun around, scooped up our daughter, and booked it down the stairs. I followed quickly behind, confused about what had just happened. Later that night, after putting our daughter to bed, my husband told me that when he looked into the attic, he had seen something move, but assumed it was his own shadow as he started to enter the attic. It then moved again, this time coming directly toward him, knocking over a box and causing the huge thud as it did. That's when he spun around, grabbed our daughter, and booked it downstairs. I thought that was spooky enough, but what my daughter said the next day sent chills down my spine. The next morning at breakfast, my daughter was still ranting and raving about the house we had visited. She kept asking me questions about what it would be like when we lived there. I gently let her know that while we were going to get a house, it probably wouldn't be that one. To my surprise, she seemed perfectly fine with that. Then she asked, "When we get a new house, will the girl be there?" Confused, I replied, "What girl?" "The girl," she said. "I don't know what girl you're talking about, sweetie," I said. Frustrated and fully expecting me to know who she was talking about, she sighed. "You know, that naughty little girl at the house we looked at. She turned around and looked at me and I screamed." I remembered the little scream she let out as she left the small bedroom the day before, right before my husband saw something in the attic. We had been careful not to talk about that incident around her because we didn't want to frighten her. I didn't know how to respond, so I just reassured her that only she, myself, my husband, and our pets would be going to the new home with us. That answer seemed to satisfy her, and we moved on. I told my husband about what she had said later that night, and he was as freaked out as I was. It was one thing for him to have an experience, but for our 3-year-old to have her own separate experience without any talk of ghosts, other children, or anything remotely spooky was downright terrifying. All I can say is I'm really glad we didn't get that house. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Dread Weaver. I'll be back next week with more terrifying true tales. If you would like to submit a story of your own, head to our subreddit r/thedreadweaver or send us an email at thedreadweaver@outlook.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications if you want to hear more. Until our paths cross again in the shadows, stay vigilant and beware the whispers of the night. This is the Dread Weaver, signing off.